People barely glanced at the man in the worn delivery uniform as he slipped into the packed graduation auditorium. His red polo shirt bore the logo of Quick Bite Express, faded from countless washes and late-night runs through the rain. His motorcycle helmet dangled from calloused fingers, and his weathered face carried the exhaustion of someone who had just finished an 18-hour shift. He wasn't supposed to stand out. He never did. Marcus Rivera had spent the last 14 years weaving through traffic on his Honda motorcycle, delivering steaming containers of pad thai, pizza boxes still warm from the oven, and coffee that helped night shift workers survive until dawn. The students at Riverside High knew him well, not by name, but as the guy who somehow always managed to get their late-night study snacks delivered before midnight, even when the weather was brutal. What they didn't know was that the gentleman who smiled through their apartment windows, who always said, "Have a blessed evening," as he handed over their orders, who never complained when they forgot to tip, was once someone entirely different. Someone the United States Marine Corps had considered irreplaceable until the day he walked away from everything. But today was different. Today, his twin daughters, Maya and Lily, were graduating as valedictorian and salutatorian respectively, and Marcus had moved heaven and earth to be here. He'd traded shifts, worked double time for 3 weeks straight, and even borrowed his neighbor's only dress shirt because his own had a stain that wouldn't come out no matter how hard he scrubbed. As he found a seat in the back row, Marcus carefully tugged at his sleeves, making sure they covered the small lightning bolt tattoo on his left wrist, a mark he'd carried for 16 years, the only remaining evidence of his membership in a classified Marine reconnaissance unit that officially never existed. The auditorium buzzed with excitement. Parents clutched cameras and bouquets of flowers. Teachers straightened their formal attire and checked their notes one final time. The graduating class of 2024 sat in perfect rows, caps gleaming under the stage lights, their faces bright with anticipation and nervous energy. Marcus's chest tightened as he spotted his daughters in the front row. Maya sat with her characteristic perfect posture, her dark hair pinned back in the elegant style she'd learned from YouTube videos because he'd never mastered anything beyond basic braids. Lily fidgeted slightly. She'd always been the restless one, but her smile was radiant. Both girls wore identical silver necklaces he'd bought them for their 18th birthday, working extra shifts for 2 months to afford the small diamonds that caught the light when they moved. The memory of that shopping trip still made him smile. He'd stood in the jewelry store for an hour, completely out of his element, while a patient saleswoman explained the difference between clarity grades and cut styles. All he knew was that his girls deserved something beautiful, something that would remind them they were precious, even when he couldn't afford much else. Raising twin daughters as a single father hadn't been easy. When Sophia died in childbirth 16 years ago, Marcus had been deployed in Afghanistan, leading a reconnaissance team through some of the most dangerous territory the Marines had ever attempted to map. The Red Cross notification reached him 48 hours after the funeral he couldn't attend. He'd held that message in his dirt-stained hands while mortar shells exploded in the distance, and something inside him had simply broken. He'd finished his tour, received commendations he never looked at, and requested immediate discharge. His commanding officers had tried everything to make him reconsider. Marcus Rivera was a legend in their circles, the man who had extracted 3 captured journalists from a Taliban stronghold, who had single-handedly held a position for 18 hours while calling in air support, who had saved more lives than anyone could count. But all Marcus could think about were 2 tiny girls growing up without either parent, being raised by Sophia's elderly mother, who was already struggling with her own health. So he'd walked away from the medals, the career, the brotherhood that had defined him since he was 18. He'd taken his infant daughters and moved to a small apartment 3 time zones away from anyone who knew his story. The only job he could find that offered flexible hours and didn't require extensive background checks was food delivery. It was honest work, and it let him be home during the day when the girls were small. The early years had been brutal. Marcus would work from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., delivering dinner and late-night snacks throughout the city, then rush home to get Maya and Lily ready for school. He'd catch a few hours of sleep while they were in class, then help with homework, make dinner from whatever ingredients he could afford, and start the cycle again. Some months, choosing between the electricity bill and groceries became a strategic decision. Some weeks, he'd eat nothing but ramen noodles so the girls could have fresh fruit and milk. But Maya and Lily never knew about those struggles. They saw a father who knew exactly how they liked their pancakes on Sunday mornings, who had learned to French braid their hair by watching YouTube videos at 3 a.m. between deliveries, who never missed a parent-teacher conference, even if it meant losing a night's worth of tips. They saw someone who celebrated every good grade, who cheered louder than anyone else at their soccer games, who somehow always managed to afford their school trips, even when it meant he'd be eating peanut butter sandwiches for a month. What they didn't see were the nights he sat on the apartment's tiny balcony after they'd gone to bed, staring at the city lights and wondering if he'd made the right choice. They didn't see him quietly crying when he had to tell them they couldn't afford the class trip to Washington, D.C., or the way his hands shook when he counted out his last $20 to buy Maya's graduation dress. They didn't see the moments when the weight of being everything to two remarkable young women nearly crushed him. Marcus had become a familiar figure in their neighborhood. The older residents knew his delivery schedule and would wave from their windows when he rode past. The local restaurant owners trusted him with their most valuable customers. The apartment complex managers knew he was reliable and hard-working, someone who paid his rent on time, even when it left him nothing for himself. Mrs. Chen at the Golden Dragon restaurant always packed extra spring rolls when she knew he was delivering to his own address. Jose from the taco truck slipped extra meat into his daughter's orders without charging for it. These small kindnesses kept them afloat more than Marcus ever let on, and they created a community around his small family that neither Maya nor Lily fully understood until they were older. The girls had grown into extraordinary young women despite, or perhaps because of, their circumstances. Maya had channeled her natural leadership abilities into student government, debate team, and volunteer work at the local food bank. She'd been accepted to 3 universities with full scholarships and planned to study international relations with the goal of joining the diplomatic corps. Lily had inherited her father's quiet intensity and her mother's artistic eye, earning recognition for her photography and writing. Her college scholarship was for creative writing, and she planned to become a journalist who told stories about people others overlooked. Both girls worked part-time jobs to help with family expenses, though they didn't know Marcus had put every dollar they earned into savings accounts for their college costs. Maya tutored younger students in math and science, while Lily worked at the local coffee shop, bringing home leftover pastries that became their weekend treats. They'd learned the value of hard work and the importance of taking care of each other, lessons that no amount of money could have taught them. Now, as Marcus sat in the graduation auditorium, watching his daughters prepare to accept their diplomas, he felt a pride so intense it was almost overwhelming. Every sleepless night, every missed meal, every moment of doubt had led to this. His girls were graduating with honors, headed to college, ready to build lives that would take them far beyond the small apartment where they'd grown up sharing a bedroom and making adventure out of necessity. The ceremony began with the traditional processional. The graduating class filed in wearing royal blue caps and gowns, their faces glowing with excitement and nervousness. Marcus spotted his daughters immediately. They moved with the same confident grace Sophia had possessed, and their smiles were identical copies of the one he saw in the single photograph he kept on his nightstand. As the principal began her opening remarks, Marcus noticed movement near the stage. A woman in a crisp military dress uniform took her place at the podium. Captain Jessica Walsh, United States Marine Corps, who had been invited to deliver the commencement address. Her bearing was unmistakably military, from her perfect posture to the precise way she adjusted her notes. Her chest displayed an impressive array of ribbons and commendations, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded troops in combat. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Being around military personnel always triggered memories he'd spent years trying to suppress. The sound of helicopters, the weight of full combat gear, the faces of men and women who hadn't made it home. He'd learned to manage these feelings, to breathe through them and focus on the present, but it was never easy. Captain Walsh began her speech about service, sacrifice, and the importance of using one's talents to benefit others. Her words were eloquent and inspiring, but Marcus found himself studying her face, trying to place why she seemed familiar. Something about her eyes, the way she paused between certain phrases, reminded him of someone from his past. The speech continued, touching on themes of courage and perseverance that resonated deeply with the graduates and their families. Marcus found himself nodding along, thinking about how his daughters embodied these qualities in their own ways. They had never complained about their circumstances, never resented him for the things he couldn't provide. Instead, they had embraced every opportunity to learn, grow, and contribute to their community. When Captain Walsh reached the portion of her speech about overcoming obstacles, her voice took on a more personal tone. "Some of you may face challenges that seem insurmountable," she said. "You may find yourselves in situations where the easy path and the right path are not the same. In those moments, remember that true courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to do what's right, despite that fear." Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes. He thought about the choice he'd made 16 years ago, leaving behind a career he'd loved to become the father his daughters needed. At the time, it had felt like giving up everything. Now, watching Maya and Lily prepare to walk across that stage, he understood it had been the most important mission of his life. The individual diploma presentations began. Marcus's heart pounded as they worked through the alphabet, getting closer to the R names. When Maya's name was called, Maya Sofia Rivera, graduating summa cum laude, recipient of the Presidential Scholarship to Georgetown University, he stood and cheered louder than he'd ever allowed himself to in public. His daughter walked across the stage with quiet dignity, accepted her diploma with a gracious smile, and found his eyes in the crowd. Her wave was small but fierce, and he knew she was as proud of him as he was of her. Lily's turn came just minutes later. Lily Elena Rivera, graduating summa cum laude, recipient of the Chancellor's Scholarship to Northwestern University, and Marcus felt his chest might burst. His younger daughter by 3 minutes had always been the more expressive of the twins, and her joy was radiant as she accepted her diploma. She blew him a kiss from the stage, causing nearby audience members to chuckle at the sweet gesture. As Captain Walsh handed Lily her diploma, something unexpected happened. The captain glanced toward the audience, following Lily's enthusiastic wave, and her eyes landed on Marcus. For a moment she seemed to freeze, studying his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Then her gaze dropped to his left wrist, where his sleeve had ridden up slightly, revealing the edge of his lightning bolt tattoo. Marcus quickly tugged his sleeve down, but it was too late. Captain Walsh's eyes widened with recognition, and her composed military bearing faltered for just an instant. She completed the diploma presentation, but Marcus could see her distraction as she continued with the remaining students. The ceremony concluded with the traditional cap toss and celebratory music. Graduates hugged their classmates, families rushed forward with flowers and cameras, and the auditorium filled with joyful chaos. Marcus made his way through the crowd toward his daughters, his heart still racing from Captain Walsh's intense stare. Maya and Lily reached him at the same time, wrapping him in a double hug that lifted his feet slightly off the ground. "Dad, we did it!" Maya exclaimed, her usually controlled emotions bubbling over. "We're really going to college. I'm so proud of you both," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother would be amazed at the women you've become." They stood together for a moment, savoring the achievement that represented years of hard work and sacrifice. Marcus pulled out his phone, an ancient model that barely took decent pictures, and they posed for selfies, laughing at his struggles with the camera angle. "Mr. Rivera," the voice behind him was crisp, professional, and carried an unmistakable note of authority. Marcus turned to find Captain Walsh approaching, her expression serious but not unfriendly. Up close he could see the details of her service record displayed on her uniform. Multiple deployment ribbons, a bronze star, a purple heart. This was someone who had seen combat and earned every piece of metal she wore. "Captain," Marcus nodded politely, moving protectively closer to his daughters. "I'm sorry to interrupt your family celebration," she said, but I have to ask you something." She glanced around at the crowd, then back to his face. "Were you ever stationed in Afghanistan? Specifically the Helmand province around 2008? Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. Afghanistan was a lifetime ago. A different person ago. "I'm sorry, Captain, but I think you have me confused with someone else. I'm just a delivery driver." But Captain Walsh wasn't deterred. Her voice dropped lower, meant only for their small group. "Sir, forgive me for pressing, but I need to know. Are you Marcus Rivera, callsign Shadow 6, leader of Reconnaissance Team Delta?" The blood drained from Marcus's face. Those names, that designation, they belonged to a classified unit that officially didn't exist. Only a handful of people would know those details, and most of them were dead. Maya and Lily looked between their father and the captain with growing confusion and concern. "Dad?" Lily asked quietly. "What's she talking about?" Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of 16 years of carefully constructed anonymity crashing down around him. He'd always known this day might come, but he'd hoped it would be after the girls were grown and gone, living their own lives far from his complicated past. "I think," Marcus said slowly, "that Captain Walsh and I need to have a conversation. Girls, would you mind giving us a moment?" But Maya stepped closer to him instead of backing away. "No, Dad. Whatever this is about, we want to hear it too." Captain Walsh looked at the twins with new interest, clearly seeing the resemblance between father and daughters in their determined expressions. "If I may, sir, I think your daughters have a right to know who their father really is." Marcus felt a familiar surge of the protectiveness that had driven every decision he'd made for 16 years. "My daughters know exactly who I am, Captain. I'm their father. Everything else is history that doesn't matter anymore." "It matters to my family," Captain Walsh said firmly. "And it matters to at least a dozen other families whose sons and daughters came home because of what you did in that valley." She paused, gathering her thoughts, then continued in a voice that carried across the small space between them. "In October 2008, my younger brother Danny was part of a patrol that was ambushed in the Helmand Valley. 17 Marines were pinned down by enemy fire in terrain that made air support impossible. The official reports say they were rescued by a Marine reconnaissance team that happened to be in the area." Marcus's hands began to tremble slightly. He remembered that day with perfect, unwanted clarity. The radio calls for help, the impossible terrain, the decision that had saved 17 lives but cost 3 of his own team members theirs. "The official reports don't mention names," Captain Walsh continued, "because that reconnaissance team was operating under classified parameters. But Danny told me about the team leader who carried him 3 miles through enemy territory with a dislocated shoulder and shrapnel in his leg. He told me about the man who called in airstrikes on his own position to create a diversion, who held off an entire enemy squad with limited ammunition while his team evacuated the wounded." Maya and Lily stared at their father with wide eyes, trying to reconcile this story with the gentleman who had taught them to ride bicycles and helped with their math homework. "Captain," Marcus said quietly, "your brother survived, and that's what matters. The rest is just details." "Just details?" Captain Walsh's voice rose slightly, causing nearby families to glance in their direction. "Sir, you saved 17 lives that day. You earned a Medal of Honor that was never officially presented because the mission was classified. You were recommended for promotion to Major, and the Corps spent 2 years trying to convince you to accept a position training special operations teams." Marcus felt his carefully constructed world tilting off its axis. "I had responsibilities here," he said simply. "My daughters needed me more than the Marine Corps did." For the first time since the conversation began, Captain Walsh's military bearing softened. She looked at Maya and Lily with something approaching wonder. "You gave up everything for them," she said quietly. "I didn't give up anything," Marcus replied. "I chose what mattered most." Maya stepped forward, her valedictorian composure finally cracking. "Dad, is this all true? Were you really a war hero?" Marcus looked at his daughter, this brilliant, compassionate young woman who had been his anchor through every difficult day for 16 years. "I was a Marine," he said slowly, "a long time ago. But that's not who I am now." "Danny never forgot you," Captain Walsh said. "He joined the Marines because of what you showed him that day. He's a gunnery sergeant now, serving his third deployment. He tells that story to every young Marine under his command, about the leader who taught him that real courage means protecting the people who can't protect themselves. Lily wiped tears from her cheeks. Why didn't you ever tell us? Marcus reached for both his daughter's hands. Because I didn't want that life to define who you thought I was. I wanted you to know me as your father, not as some character from a war story. But we could have been proud of you, Maya said. We could have known that our dad was a hero. You are proud of me, Marcus replied gently. Every day in 100 small ways, that's worth more than any medal ever could be. Captain Walsh watched this family exchange with obvious emotion. When Marcus looked back at her, she straightened to attention and spoke in her official voice. Sir, if you'll permit me, I'd like to tell these people who you really are. Before Marcus could protest, she turned to address the lingering crowd in the auditorium. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to addressing troops, and conversations gradually quieted as people turned to listen. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment. The auditorium fell silent. I came here today to speak to your graduates about service and sacrifice, but I've discovered something extraordinary among you that I think you should know about. Marcus felt his face flush with embarrassment. This was his worst nightmare, being the center of attention, having his past exposed, becoming someone other than the quiet delivery driver who preferred to blend into the background. This man, Captain Walsh gestured toward Marcus, is Marcus Rivera. For the past 14 years, you've known him as someone who delivers your food with a smile, who works long hours to support his family, who raised 2 remarkable daughters while asking nothing from anyone. Maya and Lily moved closer to their father, each taking one of his arms in a gesture of support and unity. But before he became the father and community member you know, Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera served with distinction in Afghanistan. He led a classified reconnaissance team that saved dozens of lives, including my brother's. He was recommended for the highest honors our country can bestow, and he walked away from all of it to come home and raise his daughters. The crowd had grown completely silent, parents and graduates listening with rapt attention to this unexpected revelation. Staff Sergeant Rivera, Captain Walsh said, using his old rank and turning back to face him directly. On behalf of every family whose loved ones came home because of your courage, thank you. And on behalf of every person in this room who has been touched by your kindness and work ethic over the past 14 years, thank you for showing us what real heroism looks like. The applause started slowly, with a few people clapping uncertainly. But it built quickly, spreading through the auditorium until it became thunderous. People stood, whistling and cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes. Marcus stood frozen in the center of it all, overwhelmed by the recognition he had spent so many years avoiding. Maya squeezed his arm tighter. Dad, she whispered, let them honor you. You deserve this. Lily nodded in agreement. We're so proud of you. We've always been proud of you. Marcus looked at his daughters, these incredible young women who had become everything good and bright in his world, and felt something shift inside his chest. For 16 years, he had carried the weight of his past like a burden. But seeing the pride and love in their eyes, he began to understand that his story wasn't something to hide from. It was part of what had made him the father they needed. The applause continued for several minutes, and Marcus found himself nodding acknowledgement to the crowd, accepting their gratitude with the same quiet dignity he had always shown. When it finally died down, Captain Walsh stepped closer to him one more time. Sir, I hope you know that what you did after your service is just as heroic as what you did during it. Raising 2 daughters like Maya and Lily, building a life focused on love and family. That takes a different kind of courage, but it's courage nonetheless. Marcus felt tears he had held back for years finally spill over. Thank you, Captain. That means more than you know. As the crowd began to disperse and families collected their graduates for private celebrations, Marcus stood with his daughters in the center of the auditorium that had just witnessed the most public moment of his intensely private life. The secret he had carried for so many years was finally out, but instead of feeling exposed and vulnerable, he felt something approaching peace. So, Lily said with the irrepressible grin that had gotten her through every challenge she had ever faced, Our dad is basically a superhero who delivers Chinese food." Maya laughed, the sound bright and clear in the emptying auditorium. "I knew there was a reason you always knew exactly when our orders would arrive." Marcus pulled both girls into a hug, marveling at how tall they had gotten, how strong and confident they had become. "You two are my greatest achievement," he said quietly. "Everything else is just background noise." They stood together for a long moment, three people who had built a family out of love, determination, and an unshakable commitment to each other. Outside, the sun was setting over their small city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would fade into the deep blue of evening. Tomorrow, Maya and Lily would begin preparing for college, and Marcus would return to his delivery routes and late-night shifts. But something fundamental had changed in that auditorium. The man who had spent 16 years hiding from his past had finally allowed himself to be seen, not just as a war hero, but as someone who had chosen love over glory, family over fame, and daily acts of quiet heroism over public recognition. As they walked out of the auditorium together, Maya carrying her diploma and Lily still wearing her graduation cap at a jaunty angle, Marcus realized that his story wasn't ending. It was just beginning a new chapter, and for the first time in 16 years, he was looking forward to seeing what came next. The delivery driver's secret was finally out, but what remained was infinitely more valuable: a father's love, a family's bond, and the knowledge that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on foreign soil, but in the quiet moments when we choose to put the people we love first. The end.